Hey guys, and welcome back. This is James, and today we are making a satchel bag. And to start off, bear in mind that you can go and grab the template anytime. I am going to be linking the link in the description below. This is not a template that I made, but a template I found on the internet, and I have to say it was really great. It's a great design, great template, and I definitely would suggest you pick it up if you want to make something similar. Do note though, however, that I have switched around a few things just to, small things, small details here and there, just to make it really my own. As you can see, all the stitching marks are written down on the template, and you can definitely follow those if you want to. However, I did not. Now, the reason I didn't is because I wanted to have a stitching which was a bit more precise, and I wanted to make sure that, I got stitching that I really liked, and not just the stitching that was, basically made for you. I wanted something a bit tighter, so I decided not to follow these stitching marks, but that's up to you. My method resulted in some very annoying passages later on in the build process, and I will explain those as we go along. But first of all, the thing you want to do is cut out your template and make sure it's all laid out and ready to use. I am using relatively thick vegtan vegetable tanned leather. The first step I always do before anything else is make sure that the leather is treated with neatsfoot oil. Bear in mind that these leathers have been sometimes stored in rooms where you don't know what the conditions are. You don't know how long they've been in storage, you don't know how dry they are, you don't know exactly what the oils inside the leathers are like anymore. So the first thing I would recommend is always make sure you give your leather a good coat of neatsfoot oil straight out of the box or out of the bag or out of the fold or whatever, however you get your leathers. And this step also enables you to have a look at the different stretch marks and the lines and different things that might be present on that leather. Every leather is different. I mean, the cow has lived a full life, hopefully, and will maybe have some marks on it. So make sure you get an idea of what's on your leather, what your leather looks like, to know exactly what you want to do and how you want to use that leather. I am using Fiebing's oil dye, which is also known as the Pro dye. I believe there are depending on where you are, you might find one or the other. I'm told the oil dye and the Pro dye are pretty much the same thing. I'm not an expert, so that's up to you to see what you want to use and how you want to use it. I sometimes like to add in a bit of neatsfoot oil inside my dye just to dilute it a bit. It means that I can get more coverage overall. It also means that the different steps in dyeing won't be so different. And once this is done, again, I'll come back with some neatsfoot oil. Bear in mind that dyes tend to use solvents to get the pigments inside the leather, and these solvents will dry out the leather quite considerably, depending on which dyes you're using. I do know that there is a difference between their regular leather dye and the Pro dye or oil dye, and the regular dye will wreak havoc on veg-tan leather, making it really stiff, really dry. And this is the final result after dyeing. As you can see, the dye is not perfect, but that's okay, because with the different uses of neatsfoot oils, with time, with basic patina and stuff, you'll find that dye will even out gorgeously. And even though you can still see some marks from where you've dyed one bit more than another, over time those marks disappear, and actually during the build itself these marks tend to disappear just by the process of using your hands and adding oils back into the leather and treating the leather properly. This will give it again a nice even color. The next step I want to do is mark out all my templates and just make sure that my leather is big enough, because yes, this has happened to me before where the leather piece was simply not big enough. A bit embarrassing, happens. I wouldn't worry too much about it, just this is an obvious step. While you're doing this, bear in mind of where the imperfections on the leather might be. I mentioned that every piece of leather is going to be a bit different. Now, you may want to try and avoid some of the stretch marks, you may want to try and use it. In my case, I was definitely trying to get all my big pieces going in the same direction as the stretch marks and using those stretch marks, and you can see them here and you can see them on the back of the piece. I really wanted to incorporate these stretch marks into the bag to give it a really interesting look. It's a bag that can look quite simple-ish. It's not the most complex bag in terms of designs, so I really do like the addition of these stretch marks into it, giving it that real character that I really like about it, simply put. Another thing I would always recommend, and I believe I say this every single time, take time to sharpen your tools. This is very thick leather, 2.5 millimeters thick, if not more at some points. I mean, it's quite sturdy stuff, and if your knives aren't sharp enough, you are going to make mistakes. Having a blunt knife means that you are putting more pressure on the blade, means you're putting more pressure into your cut, and eventually you will slip. And when you're putting pressure and slip, well, that goes straight into a finger, that could go into a thigh, that could go into a bit of your body. You probably wouldn't want to have it in contact that close and that fast with a niche sharp object. Just keep it nice and sharp. I've always got a small whetstone beside me. I'm not the best at sharpening tools, but with some basic sharpening techniques, you can really get those tools wonderfully sharp. I'm also going to be linking in the description below an Amazon link where you can see all the different tools I have and all the different tools I'd like to get and all the different tools I'd recommend if you want to get into leather making yourself. Do bear in mind that I get a nice little kickback if ever you do buy something through that link, and that really does help me out. So please go ahead and click on that. Have a look at what I use myself, just out of curiosity. And even if you don't want to buy anything, bear that link in mind just for future reference if you want to help me out or any other fellow creator who has a similar Amazon affiliate link. Make sure you go ahead and use those links because that really does help us out. I'll be showing you a bit later some of the stuff I make as well on my website, but right now let's get back to the bag. Once everything's cut out, I always bevel the edges, and again, edge bevels can be kept really nice and sharp, and I recommend you keeping them nice and sharp. My processing here is always going to be the same. It's been perfected a bit throughout the last few months or years that I've been doing this, but overall I'll make sure I bevel my edge, sand it all neatly flat if need be, then go ahead and add in the dye, and as you can see it's the oil dye in dark brown here, and I'm not diluting it, I'm just adding it straight on. I will then use gum trag, or tragicant gum, or adragant gum. There are different types of gum. It's more or less the same thing every time. It's a gum that will help you bring those fibers in nice and close and really seal in the leather around these edges. So you can basically just use a small drop of gum and lightly smear it across the edge there. And once that's done, you can, some people let it dry a bit, some people will just go ahead straight and rub at it with either a wood slicker, a bone slicker some people might use, or just a piece of cloth. I find that depending on how I'm feeling, I tend to use either a wood slicker or a piece of cloth. Often if it's a nice sturdy piece, I'll go for a piece of cloth. If it's a piece that's maybe not as sturdy or slightly slimmer or thinner leather, I might go for the wood slicker instead. In the build, you'll find that these strips here are made to hold together the front portion of the bag, the sides of the bag, and the back of the bag, and these are all held together with two thin strips that go all the way across the bag. You'll understand what I mean later, but I am deliberately beveling on the inside of these strips because they will be twisted inwards, and I want to make sure that if anything gets put inside the bag, that it doesn't have any sharp corners hitting it. And you might be able to understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it later. It's not necessarily the most obvious thing to understand right now on the video, but it really does help for the actual feel of the bag inside. And then comes the interesting part, not interesting for me at the time as I was doing this video because it's really annoying, but interesting in hindsight, where because I wasn't following the actual stitching marks planned for you guys or for us on the template, I decided I had to figure out where the middle of my pieces were so they could all line up nice and neatly. Well, in theory, that's all great. That works well. Find out where the middle is, that way you can line them all up and everything works well. except it doesn't work in practice, or it didn't in my case, because the pieces weren't absolutely identical and they didn't necessarily respect the template perfectly. I mean, I could have been off by a millimeter on one side, and that would really seriously compromise the placement of my stitching. So even though I got most of my stitching really, precisely placed out, not knowing exactly where the middle was a bit more on the awkward side. But more on that later. You'll understand exactly what I'm talking about in a minute. So the stitching process is always going to be the very same. I am using 0.8mm synthetic thread that has been pre-waxed. So it's great for this kind of project where you've got a nice sturdy thread for a very sturdy leather. I do use how do you say it? Basically, I pre-punch all my holes beforehand, and you saw me do that, and that really helps me go much faster in my stitching. I'm not using an awl yet. I know that I probably should learn to use an awl, but as I mentioned in a previous video, it's something that's I'm still relatively new to this, and this is a technique that I know works well for me, and I'm afraid about using awls that I will simply not get the results I'm looking for at this stage, although I promise you guys I will start practicing using an awl. I've got one here, I just haven't really gotten around to doing much with it yet. Again, back in the middle, and these long strips you can see here me sewing onto so this is the center of the bag, or the sides of the bag, that will wrap around the bag, and these long strips are going to be the ones that are holding all the different pieces together. As I mentioned previously, these are the long strips where I beveled on the inside, because they will be twisted around internally, and that's when I need the insides a bit beveled, so that if you're moving around a book or anything, or just brushing your hand inside at the bottom of the bag to try and catch a key or something, that you don't have a sharp edge. I am then going to be attaching this to the side of my bag, and this is the pieces that will grab onto the strap. And obviously, if you've got the template yourself, you'll know that this is not the way the template says it should be done. This is the way I did it. I like the idea of having something that could slightly pivot, to turn, if ever it was under stress. And I also wanted to play around with rivets as well. Riveting something is very new for me, and I really haven't had much opportunity to practice. And obviously the people watching me here will think, what on earth is he doing? And yes, when you buy the riveting tool, you do have something that helps you push down that rivet. I'm afraid, I'm ashamed to say that I simply had mislaid it and thought that I'd be able to do it without it. So I couldn't be bothered to go and find it, and that's why I'm doing it here now with a compass. Obviously that's not the best solution, and yes, I have found my riveting tool since then. However, this is what I did there. Yeah, that's what it is. As I said, and as you know, I'm not a pro here. I'm just doing this in my spare time and enjoying it immensely. So that's my rivets. Those are my rivets in. And at this point, we're going to be attaching the back of the bag, or at least the pocket on the back of the bag, to the back of the bag. Yep, that spill. Yeah, I tend to go a bit too fast, and yeah, these things happen, I guess. No real worries here. I was lucky enough that it spilled on the inside of the pocket and will not be visible before. I did score out the rough marks of where that pocket would be, so that I knew where to put the glue. I did not score out the leather first. I didn't, because you're supposed to rough out the leather before applying glue on the outside, on the skin side of the leather, not the flesh side, because that gives the glue a better place to hold on to. I did not do this because I didn't really need the glue as a structural component. I just needed it there long enough to be able to hold that pocket in place while I was stitching it. So I wasn't too worried about doing things properly there. I just needed it in there long enough to be able to stitch it, and this is what it looks like all stitched up. And yeah, so you can see the dye marks there. Definitely you can see the differences in dye, but again, bear in mind that these differences will very quickly disappear with time, with use, just having the oils from your hand, just having the dirt from the general use, and different oils that you might be adding in later, if you're adding more neat's foot oil later, as I do later on in the build, or if you're putting more wax on to protect it, or just nourishing the leather. However you guys take care of the leather, bear in mind that these marks will tend to disappear over time. I am now attaching onto the front flap the two little pieces of leather that will be used to hold the front flap closed. You'll notice later on in the video that these are not actually the straightest I could have made them. I did not follow any of the guides or the build processes that are recommended, so I just did it sort of like the way I felt like doing it. I would recommend you leave this piece till later, because I actually did not put them on as straight as they possibly could, and it turns out at the end that they don't close perfectly. I mean, you can close the bag, no worries there, but they do not hold straight exactly. So it's a bit of I'm annoyed with it. I'm annoyed with myself when I see this. I feel like I went too fast here, and I could have slowed down, could have taken more time. In the end, is it a problem? No, absolutely not. The bag works fine, looks great, and people love it. But do I see it? Absolutely, I do see it. Now, leather will tend to have a bit of a give, so it's no worries whatsoever if it's not entirely straight, and you can actually see it right there. And as I was looking at it, I kept thinking, oh, should I redo it? Can I redo it? No. Problem is, once it's done, now, yes, you can redo it, but it means that you'll have holes all over the place and your leather simply won't be as strong as it should be or could be. And I decided, let's just leave it as is. And at this point, I'm just enjoying these wonderful stretch marks all across the leather here. And I'm really excited to see this leather age with time and see those marks intensify with the different oils and stuff that are added in. The bag is now stitched up halfway, so the back is stitched onto the side, and it's looking really good, except that, the centers did not line up. On one side, it comes out really high, on the other side, it barely comes out at all. And I let this sit for about 2 days, thinking, should I redo it? Shall I leave it as is? Can I leave it as is? I mean, the centers are all aligned and everything, so why? How did I manage to do that? Well, as I said previously, I think it's just because of, all it takes is for your piece to be 1 millimeter off on one side or something like that, and then that's it, more or less. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's a better explanation than that here. But after a good hour or so of stitching these pieces on, if not more, I finally decided that no, I can't accept this. I have to try again, have to realign. So I counted the number of holes that were sticking out on one side and decided that if I'd moved half of those holes down and started again, then I should be okay, blah, 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 blah. Well, funny enough, I found out that taking these stitchings off, and I guess that's why we use saddle stitching and not regular stitching, but taking these stitchings off is surprisingly slow. I mean, it's really annoying because you're left with tons of little pieces, and it took me ages. It didn't take me ages, but it took me so much longer than I expected to do this that I was frankly very surprised at how long it took me, and the whole process of having to undo your stitching is so infuriating to start off with that you do not want to spend this long having to undo it, and it was really annoying. So I went ahead and stitched it all back together. It was better, still not great, but better, and let's move on. These pieces here are the small pieces that will be on the front of the bag, and they will have the attachment pieces to it, which will allow me to close the bag. And this is just me preparing them again, cutting out, burnishing the edges, preparing the attachments for the front of the bag, and getting all that centered in place, finding out, using the templates to try and rough out where they'll be. And this time I did take a bit more time to prepare my leather first, to make sure that the glue had somewhere to hold on, not necessarily because it was needed for the structural integrity of the whole piece, but again, it helps me place it all down, hold it down while I stitch, and because they are slightly more important pieces, I decided let's do this properly this time and take more time. After my previous failings, I sort of wisened up a bit and decided that it was time for me to slow down once more, and it was time for me to figure out how I should be doing things properly before actually getting started with doing it. So once everything's attached, I can go ahead and add on the flap to the back of the bag. Should you do this before or after finishing the base of the bag, that is to say attaching the back of the bag to the body of the bag, I don't know. So I went ahead and attached the flap to the back before attaching the front to the body of the bag. And again, you can see me trying to find the middle of these two pieces here and hoping against hope that I would be able to do this. And I actually I believe in this case here, I counted out the number of holes on my two different pieces and figured out exactly which one of these holes was the middle hole. And it worked out. It worked out okay. Bear in mind, if you're going to be building this process, that I started in the middle and worked my way out on one side and worked my way out on the other side, because I felt like this gave me a stronger attachment or a stronger bond to the whole thing. It just made the process easier for me. You guys obviously can do it the way you want, but it made it easier for me. Once that's all stitched up, I was looking to make the strap. And the first thing about making a strap is finding or creating one straight edge, and then you'll be able to use a very simple strap maker to be able to cut your strap. You can do this just by scoring a second line and cutting down the second line and cutting your strap by hand, but I decided to go ahead and use my strap cutter directly. I initially made a strap that was about, I'd say 6 or 8 centimeters wide, and decided that that was just too wide. This is a bag that I was going to be giving to my sister, and I didn't want it to be too manly, so I wanted if that is actually a thing or not, but I didn't want it to be too heavy looking. I wanted a relatively thin strap. So even though I cut a first strap that you can actually see in the back there, I decided to go ahead and make a second strap, which was slightly thinner. To attach the strap to the bag, I decided, because I wanted to be able to change around the length of the strap if need be in a relatively easy fashion, I decided to use 2 pieces of leather that should have been used in a different piece of the bag. And if you've built the templates or cut out the template yourself, you'll probably recognize where these pieces are supposed to go, and decided to use these to actually hold the strap to the bag. In my previous videos, I've been using a method at the end, or product at the end, that lots of people have criticized me for, and that is shoe polish. The reason I use shoe polish is simple. It's made for leather, and it nourishes it, and it protects it, and it makes it look gorgeous, and blah 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 blah. However, many people have been criticizing me for something, and they are totally right to criticize me for this, basically saying that shoe polish inside it have quite a few solvents sometimes, especially the cheaper versions, and these solvents over a longer period of time are not recommended for the leather. Now, will it make a big difference to your project? Probably not. Will it make a big difference in the long run? Probably not. Did it make me think? Absolutely. So what I did is made my own with beeswax and simple just neatsfoot oil, so I'm getting confused here. Half beeswax, half neatsfoot oil, if not 40-60. You guys can find a good version of that. I added in some dry pigments as well to give it a brownish color, and I use that nowadays, and it works brilliantly for me as a homemade shoe polish. It does take a lot of work because getting it on is not easy, getting it off is a bit harder, but it gives you a great result. Quick cut here, quick transition here before we actually see the end result of the bag in all its glory. These are some small card holders that I make and I have on my website. Again, as I mentioned, I do this not as a professional, I do this totally as a hobbyist, and I love leatherworking, but it's something that costs quite a lot of money to get into if you want to buy really nice leather. It doesn't cost much to get started, but, well, eventually, as all hobbies, it has its own costs, and I make these lovely little card holders. This is my card holder that I've been using for the last 3 or 4 months, and it's got a nice little patina growing on it, which I absolutely love. And you can grab them for yourself or for friends and family as a present on my website. Do go ahead and check the links in the description below. Don't forget, you can also use the Amazon affiliate link to help me out in any of your purchases. Again, this really comes in useful for me personally, and could be a great present for you guys. So these are very simple little card holders, but they can store a lot of different cards, and I've been loving the one I've got myself. It really gives me the opportunity of having a smaller wallet in my pocket, although it doesn't necessarily accept coins easily. You probably could slide a few coins in there anyway. Yeah, so there we go. There are quite a few versions on my website. This is my most popular one, my favorite one, but this is another version that I make, which you can go and pick up as well, which are very simple little card holders, but very, very effective indeed. They're all made out of vegtan leather and all done completely by hand, just the same way I make my bags, just the same way I make all my products here, all my leather things or leatherware here, and absolutely loving these little things. So go ahead and click on those links, it really helps me out. And yeah, that's about it there. Let's have a look at the final result of this satchel. Am I happy with it? Yes, I am delighted with it. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. You can see right there, the straps don't really align well with the bag when it's closed, but to be honest, no one really seems to mind that. No one's actually picked up on it apart from me and my sister, who saw it and I told about it. Does the design work well? Yes, the design is great. I find that the templates really worked out gorgeously. The end result is very useful, very practical. It's a good size, it's a good depth, it's a good everything. It looks great. My sister loves it and she's had loads of comments about it. Would I recommend this to people who want to get into leatherwork? Actually, maybe. It's not the easiest template to use simply because there are quite a few very long stitching parts, and for someone who's not used to stitching, this may not be the best thing to start off with. But if you're an intermediate leatherworker like I am, definitely go ahead and grab that template. It didn't cost me too much, I don't think, and it gives you a good result if you're patient and careful with what you do, which is not necessarily my case, but all in all, I'm very happy with it, very happy with the result, and I have to say I've really enjoyed making this, and I really loved giving it to my sister, and all in all, I would definitely try this again, maybe for myself, maybe for another friend, I'll see in the future. Anyway guys, hope you've enjoyed this video. Once again, help me out by clicking those links and go and see the tools that I use on Amazon. And thanks for watching, it's been great to have you. Do leave me a small comment and tell me what you thought about this video. I'd always love to hear your thoughts, and I hope to see you very soon in the next one. Thanks and bye bye.